The concert hall echoed with the sound of tuning strings and the impatient shuffling of expensive shoes. Students from the city's most elite conservatory sat poised behind their instruments, all eyes on the aging music professor at the front. He was known for his sharp tongue, tailored suits, and brutal critiques. He didn't teach music, he ruled it. That morning, a woman had walked into his masterclass unannounced. She wore a long, colorless coat, carried no bag, and had no registration credentials. Her hair was tied in a messy knot, and her shoes were worn, mismatched, as if borrowed in a rush. Everyone assumed she had wandered in from the street, or worse, was lost and delusional. One of the students whispered, "Maybe she's here to clean." The professor turned to her with a sneer masked by politeness. "Madam, this is a closed session, reserved for serious musicians." "I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just came to watch." "Watch," he repeated, laughing. "Maestro-level rehearsals are not a tourist attraction." A few students chuckled, but she didn't leave. Instead, she walked slowly to an empty chair in the back of the room and sat silently. The professor, clearly irritated, snapped his baton and called the orchestra to begin. The room filled with a lush but chaotic version of a complex symphony, a piece notoriously difficult even for seasoned conductors. The players were technically skilled, but the music felt cold, directionless. He stopped them midway. "You're not listening to each other." Again. The woman in the back tilted her head, then raised her hand slightly. The professor stared at her. "Yes." She stood. "May I try?" The room burst into laughter. Someone muttered, "She's joking, right?" But the professor, driven more by pride than permission, waved her forward. "By all means, let's be entertained." She approached the podium slowly. Her fingers shook slightly as she picked up the baton, but her gaze was steady. She looked at each musician, not with authority, but with understanding. Then she raised her hand, and what happened next would be whispered about for years. With her first motion, the violins didn't just play, they sang. The woodwinds wept with emotion. The percussion pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't just technical excellence, it was human. Alive. The kind of sound that reached beyond the ears and gripped something deep inside the chest. The students followed her instinctively. They weren't just reading notes, they were feeling every measure, breathing as one. The professor stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The musicians didn't look at their sheets anymore. They looked at her. When the final note faded, the room was silent. Then, one by one, the musicians rose to their feet, applauding her with a reverence usually reserved for legends. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" She set the baton down gently, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she said softly, and turned to leave. The professor, suddenly pale, stepped forward. "Wait, please." "Who taught you to conduct like that?" She paused. "No one. I learned by listening." And then she walked out just like that. The video, because someone had filmed it, went viral within hours. Unknown woman stuns orchestra. Conductor's reaction says it all. Silent genius conducts without sheet music. Watch the ending. Hashtag hidden maestro, hashtag unexpected talent, hashtag viral music moment. The comments poured in. She made the cello cry. Why isn't she leading the Philharmonic? Chills. Actual chills. But no one could find her. No ID. No trace. Until a post appeared on a private music forum. Someone wrote that years ago, a woman had lived in a small, rundown shelter on the edge of the city. She didn't speak much, but at night, she'd listen to old records on a borrowed player, eyes closed, hands moving through the air like she was conducting a dream. She never asked for anything, except silence so she could hear. The real twist came a week later. A mysterious donation was made to the conservatory, enough to fund full scholarships for underprivileged musicians for the next 10 years. No name attached, but enclosed was a handwritten note. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity isn't. Let's change that. The professor resigned a month later. He wasn't disgraced, but something in him had shifted. At his final lecture, he said, Music doesn't need applause. It needs to be felt. And once, a woman reminded me what that meant. Now, sometimes in quiet corners of music halls or late-night train stations, people report seeing a woman standing alone, hands in the air, eyes closed, conducting to the sound of a world that no one else hears. And those who stop to watch, they never forget the music.